Welcome to Milk Drunk by Bobbie, the mom-founded and led organic formula brand shaking the stigma around how we choose to feed our babies. I'm your host, Angelica Temple, and today's episode is a little different. While Bobbie is in its second year of being a company, it's in its first year of launching Bobbie for Change. Bobbie for Change is the social good and impact-driven arm of the business on a mission to evolve society for modern parenthood, aiming to create generational impact through policy, legislation, activism, and giving. Before we get to my interview with journalist, activist, and former editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue, Elaine Welteroth, we're going to flip the script and kick things off with a live recording from a recent Bobbie for Change event in LA, where Elaine moderated a conversation on the maternal health crisis with guests Charles Johnson and Kimberly Durden. Charles Johnson is a maternal care activist, father of two, and the founder of For Cura for Moms, a nonprofit he started in 2017 after losing his wife at Cedars-Sinai due to medical neglect. And Kimberly Durden is Elaine's midwife, a doula, and the co-owner of Kindred Space, the only Black-owned birthing center in Los Angeles. Without further ado, Elaine Welteroth, Charles Johnson, and Kimberly Durden.
Let me just dive in, you guys. I just want to, first of all, say thank you from the bottom of my heart for showing up today. Not for me, but for, first of all, these incredible earth angels that are literally doing God's work to keep us alive. So please, let's start by just giving them a round of applause. And we're all here for all of the families that this issue affects. This issue is very near and dear to my heart, and I know it's near and dear to your hearts. That's why you're here in the middle of the day on a random Thursday. I don't know how you guys pulled this off, because I see some real busy, badass female bosses up in this room, and I just cannot tell you how much it means to me that you managed to show up for the shit that matters. Mm-hmm. Thank you for being here. And I also just kind of want to set the table for this conversation, because we're obviously here talking about one of the most grim realities there is. And I want to acknowledge that there are sensitivities in this room around this issue, because even if you do survive childbirth, for many of us, there is trauma that comes with it. And so I want to acknowledge those sensitivities, and at the same time, my intention in starting these conversations or encouraging these conversations is to do so through the lens of hope and collaboration and with a fix-it spirit. Because I think that when we hear these stats, we can so easily feel shut down, like it's too fucked up to fix. Mm-hmm. This system's too far gone. And let me just hope for the best on my journey, right? And the thing for me that I just cannot live with is that the data says 83% of these deaths are preventable. And when you come to understand that, it can do one of two things. It can make you feel hopeless, or it can motivate you to make a change. And I hope that this conversation and that this time that we spend together today encourages all of you guys to choose the latter. I certainly have, and that's why I'm telling my story, and that's why I'm here amplifying and partnering with these incredible people who are doing this work every single day, because the shit's gotta change. And I truly believe that if we approach this with a spirit of possibility and hope, that we can change these outcomes in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. Our children should not be facing these same statistics. And if they are, we didn't do our job. So let's start the convo. And I don't want you guys to leave depressed. That's my goal, okay? I don't want everyone leaving here like crawling back into bed like, well, today's done. I want you guys to leave here energized because you will recognize that we all can work together to change this. Yes. And I am sitting next to two people who are reminding me of that every single day. Charles, you have been out here telling your incredibly tragic but powerful story. And so I want to start with talking about the power of storytelling with you. You have turned your anguish and your anger into an activated movement that is a beacon of light for people like me. And it was for me when I was in a dark place, when I felt like the hospital system was stealing my joy, stealing my hope. Is the storytelling working? What are the wins?
Elaine, that's a great question. So let me get to the edge of my seat and lean into this fix-it spirit. When we talk about storytelling, where I think we made a huge difference in what I call this maternal health revolution is I think that for decades, people had been focusing on the data, right? The numbers. And when you look at these statistics, they're heartbreaking. They're heartbreaking, but when data lands on your desk as a legislator, as a policymaker, you can look at that data, you can cringe, and you can turn the page. But what I think happened is when we started centering this around the personal stories, right? And we began to humanize this movement in a way, it's different. Because when I go to Capitol Hill, and if you're looking at a dossier full of data, you might be able to turn the page. But when I sit down in front of you, and I look you in your eye, and I tell you what it's like to tell an 18-month-old that his mother's never coming home, right? When I tell you what it's like to rock a child to sleep at 3 a.m. who will not stop crying, and I dare you not to support this. I dare you to explain to your constituents why mothers and babies simply aren't a priority, right? And so that's why I think the storytelling is so important. So the journalists who have used their gifts, the filmmakers, the people that are just simply sharing these stories by word of mouth, it is so important and it's impactful because it's allowed us to reframe this. This is not a women's health issue. This is not a Black women's issue. We have to frame this conversation for what it truly is it is a human rights issue. Every single woman in this country deserves to have the right to give birth to a healthy child and then live to raise that child, period. Right? And so that's where I really think storytelling, centering the stories, centering their lives and calling their names, we cannot discount how important that is and how important it will continue to be. But I also want to be clear that this has to end with us, right? One of the toughest questions I've ever been asked in this work, to piggyback on what you said, Elaine, was I was in Texas. I'll never forget where I was. And a woman asked me, she said, "Charles, do you hope that your boys will pick up this work after you're done?" And the thought that this would still be a problem when my boys are ready to have kids, So we're going to fix this, and sooner than later, we're going to be able to talk about this crisis in the historical context.
Before we move to you, Kim, Charles, if you can share with us some of your wins. How is your storytelling moving the needle?
We were able to pass the first ever piece of federal legislation to prevent women from dying in childbirth. It's called H.R. 1318, a.k.a. the Preventing Maternal Deaths Act. And we passed that in 2017 with unanimous consent during one of the most divisive times in politics in our lifetime. We're talking about smack dab in the middle of Trump's first term, right? And where people couldn't agree on nothing. And so we got it done. So that was huge. We've passed legislation here in California, the California Momnibus. We've passed legislation in several states, including my home state of Georgia. We expanded postpartum Medicaid from, first it was only 6 weeks, then we expanded it to 6 months, and now it's a year postpartum, right? Getting companies to reimagine the way that they distribute maternal health benefits, right? Getting partners, corporate partners and stakeholders like Bobbie to come to the table in meaningful ways, right? And really show up and raise the standard of what's expected right, expected from the companies that we support. Kira's brother always says something that just really sums this up, and it makes me emotional thinking about it. He says, you can't stop the ocean from rising. And I really feel that that's where we are. And I know that it's grim when we hear these stories and they're heartbreaking, but that's where we are. The tide is rising. The awareness, the momentum is unlike it's ever been before, and it's up to us to be good stewards of that momentum.
I love that. You know, a lot of times when we talk about this issue, we do so through the lens of grief and the loss of precious life. And we need that because it's a reminder of how bad it actually can be and how bad it is. But I also think that we need more success stories from Black women.
Absolutely.
Who are showing you what it can be like and what you deserve and what your alternative options are.
Yes.
And that's part of why I'm telling my story, because I truly feared becoming a statistic when I was in this hospital system, not being able to find a doctor that cared about me, that made me feel seen and heard. And the experiences that I had were unbelievable. You know, some of us can think like, those stats don't apply to me. Somehow, like we hear them and we think, and we know how heartbreaking it is, but for some reason we think it won't apply to me. And I found myself in these seats in front of doctors shrinking, trying to figure out how can I speak differently, sit differently, say less to make them care for me better than they are. Like, what do I gotta change? What do I have to do? And that's not how it should be. But I think those stats sometimes lower the expectations for Black women. We think this is just how it is. It's fucked up. So
survival should not be the goal.
Right. Thriving should
be the goal.
That is it. That's it. And so I want to talk to you, Kim, because you are the sole reason that I am a living example of how much better it can be. Yes. And that we don't have to set our sights on just surviving childbirth, but we can thrive. As the co-founder and co-owner of the only birthing center that is led by Black women in LA, which is kind of crazy given how diverse this place is, you're changing and saving lives right here, and other Black midwives all around the country are doing the same. So talk to us about how important it is to hear about this issue from the perspective of a Black midwife.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Bobbie. Thank you to Bobbie, and thank you to Elaine, and thank you to Charles. You're my inspiration.
Listen, you know, this is Mutual Inspiration Society. You know I adore you.
I always knew I wanted to have a midwife one day when I had kids, and I kind of had to unpack how I got that idea. But it was really from like reading Life magazine, and I saw the story on a Black midwife named Maud Collin. Do y'all know who that is? Yes. And if you don't, just look her up, Maud Collin. And there was a beautiful Life magazine, like photojournalist kind of story on her and the work she was doing as a Black midwife in the South. And what a lot of people don't know now is that Black midwives kind of delivered the country. Yes. They delivered the United States, okay? They were targeted. Clap, clap, clap. Yes. Woo-hoo. And they were targeted even as midwives were targeted to bring over as enslaved folks because they knew how to midwife. And if you think about the labor force bodies, so Black midwives were important to help enslaved folks deliver as many babies as possible so that this country could get built on the backs of slave labor. And then when that wasn't ideal anymore because slavery had ended and we don't want a whole bunch of Black babies running around anymore because they're free, midwifery was also systematically erased. So we were good enough to bring 12 and 13 babies in from one human because women were having lots of babies. They were bred. We were good enough to bring in those babies, but then when we didn't want that many babies anymore, we got wiped out systemically, like I said, and the OBGYN profession was created. It had began to be created on the backs of enslaved women, as we know about Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, thank you. We know that those 3 enslaved women were used for medical experimentation with no anesthesia to develop the tools of modern obstetrics that we use today. Remember, because Black people couldn't feel pain. First of all, Black folks wasn't allowed in the hospital to give birth for up until, probably 50s, 60s, 70s. And midwifery, right, historians? So midwifery also didn't die out until, or I should say it wasn't erased completely until the 70s. I'm talking about Black midwifery in particular. And so, all the things that come with that, like when you feel like you can't go to the hospital, it's like something's being kept from you. And then when somebody says, okay, you can come to our hospital now, then a lot of us are like, great, I can get, I can do what everybody else is doing. I want to go to that hospital, that shiny place over there, like maybe even putting down our traditional ways of coming into being. But at the end of the day, here we are, 2023. And I think what I'm seeing, and I hope this answers your question, I don't think it does, but what I'm seeing is just this call to action. I love what you said, this maternal health revolution is happening, and it's happening in real time, and it's happening it's like the pace is picking up. And I pray that we can end this crisis in our lifetime. I really do. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it, because we just have so much work to do just systemically. These institutions, we're all here talking. We're almost preaching to the choir in this crowd. Like the folks that need to hear it are not on our page.
So now that America realizes that it has this real problem on its hands, everybody's like, oh, where are the midwives? Where are the midwives? Where are the doulas, right? Everybody's saying doula care. But at the end of the day, doulas and midwives cannot be solely responsible for fixing something that has been systematically preying upon people for centuries, right? Particularly if they are under-resourced.
Yes.
Right? And so it's not just enough to support and advocate for access to doula care, but don't just pay doulas a surviving wage. Don't just pay midwives a surviving wage. Pay them a thriving wage, right? So we have to talk about that. We have to be real about what this means, and that means making sure that people have plans where doula care is reimbursable.
Yes.
They have access, that they are being trained. And even the other thing that I think that isn't focused on is one of the reasons that there is only one of your centers here in LA is how difficult is it? How much bootstrapping did it take, right? How difficult is it to go to a bank and get financed for a birth center? You understand what I'm saying? All these things are intentional, and these are things, so we have to address every aspect of the systematic obstruction of doula and midwifery care.
That part. And what's interesting is, as Elaine has chosen this as her platform, what I think, and I hope it's okay for me to say this, Elaine, but like when she's reaching out to say, hey, I'd like to tell this story, the people that say no, the organizations and the institutions that say, no, we can't do this story. Mm-hmm. Why?
Brands and companies in the parenting space to step up and put their money where their customers' interests lie. And I just want to really acknowledge you guys, Bobbie. The women warriors that work for Bobbie, y'all, yes, they are some real ones. Yes, and I've never been prouder to partner with anybody. And this is not this is real. I became an investor. I'm a partner with you guys, and I've never felt more proud about any work I've done with any company. So I really am so proud of you and the work that all of you guys are doing together. I'm just proud to elevate it and make sure my community is aware of it so that we can all support. And because everyone in this room, you mentioned, we're preaching to the choir here. But the point is, these are the foot soldiers.
Yes. Yep.
So we got to equip this community with the talking points the tools, the QR codes, so that we can make this movement move, continue to move, keep Kindred open, keep For Cure for Moms doing what it needs to be doing so we can eradicate this issue. So thank you so much. You
Thank
guys,
you all.
give them a round of applause. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. Thank you for being here.
I am so thrilled that today's guest is journalist, television host, author, activist, fashion icon, in my opinion, former editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue, Elaine Welteroth. Elaine, welcome to Milk Drunk.
Thank you for having me. Hi, and
You and Bobbie for Change recently did an event in LA in a conversation with Charles Johnson from For Cure for Moms and Kimberly Durden from Kindred Space in LA. And before we jump into our conversation today, one of the things I loved that you spoke about at the event was that you don't want people to leave these types of conversations depressed. You want people to leave the conversation with a fix-it spirit, that having the conversation is part of the action that we can take. So I would love for this conversation to have that same sort of arc, that same thesis, let's say. So with that being said, how did you feel after moderating the conversation at the event in LA?
I truly don't think I've ever been a part of a more meaningful event in my career. There was just something really, really special and meaningful and touching about seeing people that I love and people I've never met, like take time out of their day, out of their busy days to come together, like literally on a random Thursday in the middle of the day to hear from these incredible birth workers and advocates who are doing this work every single day to make a difference and to really join forces with them. And so I really did want people to understand not just how grim the stats are and the realities are currently, but I want people to understand the opportunities that are at our fingertips to fix this.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the huge reasons we're doing this podcast and did that event is because not enough people know about this or anything that's going on. You know, I think that parenthood can be this wonderful equalizer. You know, like we're all going through this madness together.
Listen, I had every intention of giving birth in a hospital like most American women I know. You know, it's just kind of the norm. It's what my mom did. It's what her mom did. And so I kind of set off on this quest to find a doctor to deliver the baby. So on top of the fact that I have every advantage available to a birthing person from the fact that I'm educated, I'm a journalist. I know what questions to ask. I have the means to afford the best healthcare available. I'm pretty well connected. I know who to ask for what. Like, I am very clear. And I had no reason to think that I wouldn't find exactly that, except for the fact that it was really hard. And I also became aware of the statistics around the maternal mortality crisis. And those stats somehow seemed separate from me and my experience at the time. And so I basically went on a quest to find the right doctor, and I started dating different doctors, and I ended up seeing up to like literally 8 doctors. And fortunately, one of them seemed great, but he had a vacation planned around the time of my delivery and wouldn't move it. And so I had to rule him out. And I just had, apart from my experience with that one doctor, I had bad experience after bad experience after bad experience, from being told that I had exceeded my 2 to 3 question max per visit. Yep. The doctor stood up in the middle of my question asking, and this is the 7th doctor by this point.
No.
So at this point, I'm 30 something weeks pregnant, and I've seen now you're the 7th doctor, or she might have been the 8th doctor that I saw. And I really needed a win at that point. You can imagine how like broken my spirit was at that point, and like how much I really needed this one to be the one. And she literally stood up with her clipboard in hand in the middle of our conversation and started to walk out. And my husband said, I'm sorry, do you need to, like, are we holding you? Do you need to be somewhere? And she said, yes, you've exceeded your typically I allow 2 to 3 questions per visit, and you've exceeded that. And I've given you grace, but I need to leave now. And she also was the same doctor who told me when I asked her, what are your rates of intervention? Which is a question I would not have known to ask except for the fact that I was doing my homework around the maternal mortality crisis. And she said to me, what do you mean? Everybody needs something. I asked her if there was any chance that when I was admitted into the hospital, if I could forego an IV, unless I absolutely needed medication to come through the IV because I wanted to be able to move around freely. And she laughed at me and she said, what do you think this is? You can't just walk up into a hospital, pop a squat and have a baby. And this was the last thing she said to me before she walked out of the
Elaine,
room.
That is awful.
It was truly disorienting. And I was taken aback each time because each time, I don't know, I'm an internal optimist and I just kept thinking like the next one will be better. The next one will be different. And, you know, what I realized is that this is not an issue where we can afford to think of these as isolated instances. This is not a situation where I'm telling this story because I'm looking for sympathy for my story. This is actually not about my story. This is about a larger systemic issue that needs to be addressed. Because if we focus on these individual stories and if we vilify individual doctors, we are missing the point that this is about a system. We need to prioritize the patient care model, which can be embraced by not just midwives, but also doctors in the hospital system. And I do think that we can do better. We deserve better and we can do better. Because of the bad experiences I was having in the hospital system, I decided to explore alternative options, which led me to Kindred Space, LA, which is a birthing center, the only birthing center that's founded and run by Black midwives. And I was referred to them by a couple of people, and I kind of put off reaching out until it got to the point where I was just like about to quit. Like I just was like, maybe I just won't go to the doctor anymore. Like I don't know what to do, but I can't keep going back in there and walking out feeling like this. It was really taking a toll on my mental health and at a really critical time in my pregnancy. And so I was so grateful to have been introduced to Kimberly Durden, who's the co-founder of Kindred Space and the midwife that honestly saved my life. She saved my pregnancy, and she preserved and reclaimed that dignity that I deserve to have in the process of bringing life into this world.
It must have just felt like clouds clearing. I can't imagine going through that. One thing I wanted to touch on with midwifery is, did you mentioned a little bit your perception of midwifery, before meeting Kim. Did you know that it was historically such a large part of Black culture before working with Kindred Space?
No, absolutely not. I knew very little about midwifery care. In fact, I only know 2 people who've had a home birth, and they happen to be some of my closest friends. But we didn't really talk that much about the care they received and how it was different from the hospital care model. And it's so funny. I think there's very little most of us know about childbirth overall.
Yes.
Okay.
Very true.
Like, so let alone these like what's considered air quotes alternative paths to
yes.
And there's no one who's like stepping in to say, we got to talk about your medical options. We got to talk about what you need to know when you step into that next doctor's appointment. We got to talk about what happens if you ever feel silenced and how to advocate for yourself. We got to talk about, do you need funding and support to have the kind of birth you want? What kind of birth do you want? Like, what are the options you have? Like, there's like a world of education that I believe is like by design, we are not taught.
No, not at all.
We need to know about our options, and we need to know them sooner before we're the ones in the hot seat, before it's too late. We're already pregnant and we're sort of on this path that's full of anxiety and stress. And I just, there's so much I wish I knew before I became pregnant about how to keep myself safe and sane in the process, and how to keep myself alive. Because a lot of it comes down to self-advocacy.
You know, you've made this decision. You had agency over your birth plan. You're feeling good. It went well, right? And then you realize there's all these other stigmas that you get to shake. One of them being around feeding. I know that you chose to combo feed your baby. So that means formula alongside breastfeeding within the first month or something like that.
Day two.
Okay, great. Definitely within the first month. Can you talk to us about this decision, you know, and how that felt for you, how you made it, and what you were met with?
First of all, I went into birth and parenting, motherhood with a very open mind. And I was very intentional about not putting undue pressure on myself about the whole breastfeeding thing. Like I know enough to know it doesn't work out so well for everyone. And so I thought my intention is to breastfeed. And if I can, I will. And if I cannot, for whatever reason, I will not beat myself up about feeding my baby the best formula on the market that I'm aware of, and making sure he's fed. Like this is this part. Listen, guys, I've been through a lot in my pregnancy and throughout my pregnancy. This is not a battle I'm fighting. Okay. I fought so much just to get to the point where I can have the baby, survive that, hopefully try to thrive through it. That, listen, once he's here, we gonna keep him alive. Then that's it. That's it. I'm not even like open for discuss. Like it doesn't even, it's like that stigma, you could miss me with that. Why would I allow myself to beat myself up after my body just did the most incredible, like miraculous act? There's no way on the other side of that I am going to beat myself up. Hell to the no. So my baby, my huge, beautiful baby, was hungrier than I could keep up with at first. And so I needed some time to catch up to his appetite. And so I was already in the Bobbie family. I was prepared. I mean, I had a stash. Thank God, because I gave birth in the middle of a formula crisis.
Right.
Picked a great time to become a parent. So there were like multiple crises all at once, from the pandemic to this sort of racial pandemic that was sort of flaring in a way that was on display for every mother of a Black child to be thinking about constantly. And then, you know, the formula shortage. And so there was a lot on my mind, and I got 99 problems. And formula feeding wasn't one. Okay.
Yes.
I wasn't worried about it. I was like, grab the formula. Let's do this thing. This baby needs to eat. It wasn't like formula or breastfeeding. It was like, I'm working on breastfeeding, and in the process, I'm supplementing with formula. And I figured out a way to increase my supply through pumping, through increased hydration, through certain teas, keeping my stress down, helping with the latch. Like I did all the things. And then I was also formula feeding, and it worked for me. It worked beautifully for our whole family. Everyone got a chance to feed the baby, to help out, to allow me to sleep. And my baby is healthy, happy, and freaking huge. He's
freaking
20.
Huge.
He's almost,
I saw that baby.
Yeah, he's like 25 pounds and some change, and he's 9 months, and he's just happy as they come. He is healthy, and
that's awesome. I'm a big believer that motherhood births advocacy. Right? You were an activist long before becoming a mother, but then you open this this new facet, this new dimension of your activism, yourself as a human, yourself as an advocate. Can you share some helpful language that you learned or that you wish you had known when dealing with a broken medical system?
First of all, I think that we have to change the way we talk about birth itself.
Okay.
Not
Yeah.
just how we talk about the maternal mortality crisis, which in and of itself feels like this big, heavy issue that's almost too like fucked up to fix, you know? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people shy away from they want to turn the other cheek when they hear that topic come up. You don't lean
Mhm.
in, you lean back. But I think before
Mhm.
we even touch on that issue, I think we have to change the language that we use when we're speaking about childbirth. Because for me, a lot of what I understood or thought about childbirth was informed by fear. And when you are fueled by fear, you are less likely to feel your own power in any given circumstance. You're more likely to give up your power, to give your power away, right? And you're less likely to ask questions and keep an open mind because you're just like, I'm afraid. So,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I want to allow for the possibility that more birthing people have access to the divinity and the sacred, beautiful experiences that can happen in childbirth if only we are fed different messages throughout our pregnancy about what this experience could be. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, one thing we talked about is how we move forward, right? You've
Yeah.
received this education because you went looking and you worked at it, right? And you found this amazing space. And one thing you spoke about at the event with Charles and Kim was all about alignment, right? And bringing and everyone being here in this space and whoever's listening to this conversation now, being able to leave listening and having these conversations with a fix-it spirit, with a way to keep it going. What are actionable ways people listening can join in on the cause of less preventable deaths and more success stories for Black mothers and Black birthing people? Is keeping the conversation going action enough, or, what can you recommend?
Well, first of all, I do want to echo sentiments that Charles Johnson of For Cure for Moms shared during our conversation that day at the panel.
Yeah.
He said, I think this whole issue needs to be framed differently for people. This is not about a black, air quote, black maternal mortality crisis, as if this is some marginalized issue that only affects Black women. This is not a Black women's issue. This is not even just a women's issue.
Yes.
This is a human rights issue. And so that is important to bring people to the table to help them understand that this affects you too. This
100%.
affects all of us. And just like any other systemic issue in our country, when it comes to any crisis, it will always disproportionately impact Black women because they are the most unprotected class of people in this country. And so when you understand that making conditions better for Black women naturally makes conditions better for all, then you understand that you have a different level of investment in fixing these problems. But let's be very clear. This is a maternal mortality crisis that affects all birthing people. And it requires all of us, our partners, the parenting brands that we are investing in every day to take care of our children, the lawmakers that we elect into office, to all come together to find solutions to this, because the solutions are multi-pronged. It's not going to take one thing. As much as I wish I could say, here's the one thing that everyone can do right now to fix this problem, it is not that simple. This is a truly systemic issue. It is deeply layered. And so the solutions are going to have to be just as multifaceted. But it all starts with fixing this issue needs to be a priority. And you can't understand that if you're not brought into the issue. And so I think to your point, yes, storytelling and amplifying conversations about this and continuing the conversations about this are crucial to changing the culture, to changing the narrative about this, bringing more people to the table, bringing more manpower. And when I say manpower, I also mean woman power.
Yes.
Like that is the key. That's the key that opens the door, right?
We're going to share in the show notes several links and actionable items. We'll include all the organizations that we've mentioned here and some of the efforts that we are putting forth on the Bobbie for Change side. And Elaine, thank you so much for sharing your story and time with us today. This has been incredible. You are a superhero. And we are so happy to have you in our family. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was an honor.
A big thank you to Elaine Welteroth for joining us today and for holding the space for the conversation with Charles Johnson and Kimberly Durden. To learn more about Bobbie for Change, head on over to bobbieforchange.org and make sure you check out forcuraformoms.com and kindredspacela.com to learn more about Charles and Kimberly's incredible organizations. All websites will be linked in the show notes of today's episode. Be sure to follow Bobbie on Instagram @Bobbie for all Milk Drunk updates and sign up for the Milk Drunk newsletter at milk-drunk.com. Milk Drunk is powered by Bobbie, hosted by me, Angelica Temple, and produced by Beth Rowe and the team at Full Picture Productions. If you're liking what we're shaking here at Milk Drunk Pod, be sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss a thing. Also, if you have topics you want to hear discussed or have a hot parenting take, our DMs are always open.